Thank you for joining as we continue our discussions of human history based on the resurrection of the Kushites. We previously discussed that one piece of land stretching from Tanzania to Egypt, occupied by the Kushites for thousands of years. We will continue with that one piece of land, Tanzania to Kenya to Somalia to Ethiopia to Eritrea to Kush or Nubia to Egypt, all one piece of land once occupied by the Cushite and the Cushite Empire. We will continue the discussion with the people who came after Homo habilis and Homo erectus. And these people, historians, scientists, anthropologists, paleoanthropologists, are telling us that these people are the Khoikhoi of southern Africa who became the Khoisans. And then after them came the Bantu, the Nazlets, the Atarians, and these are the people and the culture who form the Tasseti Empire that became the Kushite Empire, covering all of that one piece of land, including Egypt. Did you know that the original name of Africa was Alkebulan? That was the name that the natives gave to Africa before the birth of Christ. Did you know also that many of those countries on that one piece of land were also renamed? And in renaming Alkebulan and some of these countries, the natives of those pieces of land, they inevitably lost their history, their culture, their heritage. And then later generations of those natives, the Kushites, forgot about their history, forgot about their culture, forgot about their heritage and all the great accomplishments that were made by their ancestors. We will talk about that, and we will show you the ruins of those cultures created by the Kushites before the birth of Christ. Just to give you a few examples of what were lost in the renaming of a country or a continent. The Ishango bone that was discovered 30,000 years before Christ. And this bone was found with inscriptions of mathematical calculations, which also allowed the early Kushites to thereafter invent algebra and other forms of mathematics during their reign in human history. The Naptoplaya is a stone circle invented by the early Kushite to study the stars, representing the first evidence of astronomy and planet Earth. And this stone circle at Naptoplaya was used not only to study the stars, but to also study the weather systems. It was a calendar as well that the farmers used to determine rainfall and to determine when the monsoons would come that would destroy not just their crops but their kingdoms. So the Naptoplaya stone circle is the first astronomical device known to man, invented by the early Kushites. And just to give you one more, the Great Sphinx of Giza was also built by the early Kushites. And this great things with the pyramid alignment also was part of not just the worship of the Supreme God, but also they are aligned with star systems still being determined. And no, the Great Sphinx was not built by aliens. No, Naphtali was not built by aliens. And no, Ishango bone with mathematics was not invented by aliens. And there are a lot other accomplishments that change our history, human history, that will be discussed. Cushite emblems, insignia, regalia, inscriptions or adorn, and all the Kushites' edifices and monuments. Cushite builders who constructed the incomparable Naphtali, the Great Sphinx, innumerable pyramids, and other monuments of grandiose architecturally designed palaces with distinctly Cushite motifs and styles will also be shown and discussed. The elaborate palatial columns still adorned with historical inscriptions and art forms of a distinctly Cushite motif will also be shown and discussed. But let's move to the renaming and the appropriation of human culture and why we must cancel this culture that has caused so much harm. And all of us, but especially the people who were part of early human history. The Kushites. Yes, we must cancel this culture and replace it with the truth. The renaming of a continent and its kingdoms by the few marked the beginning of the taking and the appropriation of a people's culture, leaving that people with a continuous vector of harm for over 2,000 years. And now the absence of that rich culture has become the stains not only on those people, but on all of us and on human history in general. This is the singular reason why it is critical to cancel the renaming of that continent, to cancel the renaming of those kingdoms, such that the people so affected can restore their culture, their heritage, their history, at least what's left of it. So Alkebulan was renamed Africa by the ancient Romans. The supreme god, Ammon of the Cushites, was renamed God by other cultures around the world before the birth of Christ as well. All the regions of East and West Africa was Cushite. It was one Cushite or Taseti empire. From Lake Nalubale, which was renamed to Lake Victoria, all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, that main piece of land, again, stretches from Tanzania, Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan or Nubia, to Egypt, all that one piece of land was Cushite, but because of their renaming, it was broken up, supposedly to remove Egypt or Kemet from the continent of Africa or the continent of Alkebulan. So here we go. Kemet was renamed Egypt, essentially to remove Egypt from the Kushites. It was renamed Egypt by the Greeks before the birth of Christ. Taseti, which is the original Kush, was renamed Ethiopia by the Greeks as well, around the 4th century BC. So Taseti was renamed Ethiopia, Kemet was renamed Egypt, Kush was renamed Nubia by the ancient Romans looking for gold. Of course, Nubia or Kush was known for its massive gold mines that gave rise to the power of the Cushite Empire. Lake Nalubale was renamed Lake Victoria by the British during the 19th century. And of course, again, Nubia in later years was renamed Sudan. And now you know about the renaming. And now we'll explain to you some of the harms that the renaming has caused on all of us. So the renaming of Alkebulan and the renaming of Kush was the beginning of that land being stripped of its arts, its science, its engineering, and so much that it had created. By renaming Alkebulan, by renaming Kush, it made it so much easier to strip the land and its people of its culture. And as you will see, much of it was carried away to other places in the world. So I say to those places who have parts of Alkebulan and parts of Cushite arts and science and history and heritage, please donate it to museums around the world so that everyone can have access to it, especially the Cushite progenies that live today. So the renaming of Alkebulan and Kush, which for Kush was the zenith of all Alkebulan natives' achievements. Kush and Egypt were the zenith of the accomplishments of all Alkebulans. Keep in mind their journey from Homo habilis, Homo erectus, to the Khoikhoi, to the Khoisans, to the Bantu, to Taseti, and then to Kush. All that evolutionary culture and achievement was stripped away. And the people who come after were also stripped of their cardinal virtues of culture, the very virtues that are used to create heritage. Thus, the traditions and social norms of these people faded. These very virtues that give rise to the creation of heritage faded away into obscurity. And probably most importantly, the divine worship of the true God for these people, along with the people's spirituality and their moral ethics, also faded away and got replaced by something else. What do you have left when a people has been renamed, their continent renamed, their kingdoms renamed, their culture and heritage taken or appropriated? What remains is a people disorganized and discarded with itself, without a land or state, without history or culture or bonds of their cardinal heritage, without aspiration, a people aspiring toward nothing and likewise unable to guide their very children and grandchildren with any attachment to their ancient ancestors, the future generations imperiled and doomed to the same unforgiven fate. I have just described to you the foundations of the last 2,000 years. A people lacking roots or culture inevitably become commodities defined and branded for profit by the few, who will only show disdain and subject all future generations to the same fate. They also are the few that will determine the future of human survival, with all the nefarious tendencies of our planet right now: war and hate and bigotry, global warming. The renaming has a deeper, impactful force than you can imagine, and it should change. We should change it. If we don't change it, we are complicit to all of this. We need courage to change the course of our future. We need to reinvent the future for all our children and our grandchildren. But it should begin with the truth. And the truth is, let's restore what's left of our culture and use it to rebuild our current generation for all future generations. To do so, we must cancel the stains of the renaming. We must cancel Egypt. We must cancel Nubia. We must cancel Ethiopia. We must cancel Africa to restore Al-Kibalin and the values of Al-Kibalin, the dignity of Al-Kibalin. We must restore our history and culture. We must cancel the great lie. We must cancel the great lie that we have carried on our backs for over 2,000 years. We must cancel the medieval and imperial acts of the Jurassic imperial few that threaten humanity's very survival. which is human history and the human future to be built. We must cancel the oppressive citadel of deceptions of our history, world history, human history. We must uncloak the inventions of the Kushites. We must uncloak the inventions of Cushite genius. Finally, we must restore the true actual names of Al-Kibilan and the kingdoms where human history began. Gladly, much of that human history has remained uncancelled and undeleted by the few guardians of the scripture of the Holy Bible with its biblical history, thus enabling the venerable Cushite history and culture to also live on. Of course, its portrait, coherent and filling the unwritten pages of human history left blank to create shadows of entrapment for those unwary of their own history and heritage as they eternally await the redemption of a merciful God who has remained blind to their stains, and a God who is not even of their own. Nevertheless, good prevails among us powerless mortals. There are other Greeks, historians, scholars like Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, who have left lots for us to rebuild the culture of human history. The few guardians of the scriptures of the Holy Bible that left undeleted the references to the extraordinary accomplishments of the Kushites. And then there are legions of other scholars, historians, archaeologists, writers, paleoanthropologists. And then there is DNA science. There is chemical analysis of fossils that are now resurrecting the Kushites. So the resurrection of the Kushites has begun with facts. So thanks to those venerable, courageous historians that fought off the Jurassic-minded, imperial, wealthy few who would stop us, who would keep us in the shadows, in the dark, to the true values of history, the true facts that are the light of the future. Stay tuned. Henceforth, we will use the real name of places and countries. We will use the real name of Africa, which is Alkebulan. We will use the true name of Egypt, which is Kemet. We will use the true name of Ethiopia, which is Kush, Nubia, which is Kush. We will describe that one piece of land from Tanzania as it should be. Please bear with us for sticking to the true names of human history and human culture. Just to recap a little bit, early human history evolved in the alluvial plains around the Alkebulan Great Lake, where Lake Nalabale is encircled by Kenya, Congo, and Tanzania. Lake Nalabale, called the Mother of God by the Alkebulans, as well as the Mother of all rivers, along with River Nile and the Okavango in the Kalahari, enable much of human history, as you have heard before, which began about 2.5 million years ago with Alkebulans, Habilis erectus, and now the Khoikhoi of the Kalahari region, and more specifically, the rich rainforests of the Okavango. According to both genetic and fossil evidence, early Homo sapiens arrived to modern humans in Alkebulan between 250,000 to 100,000 years ago, with members of one branch crossing the ocean and seas from Alkebulan around 60,000 years ago, and over time replacing early human populations such as Neanderthals and Homo erectus. So the inhabitants of Lake Nalabale and Nile River countries from Kenya to Kemet were all Kushite kingdoms forming the Tasseti Empire and later the Cushite Empire. But when these countries were renamed, they were for all intent and purposes essentially to remove Egypt from Kush and making the newly renamed Alkebulan into what is now called Africa, as has been discussed before. I will use artifacts to show how ancient Alkebulan civilizations and Alkebulan empires gradually and systematically developed in this region from 200,000 years to 10,000 years ago. We have paintings, handicrafts, hieroglyphics, arts, engineering feats left behind in thousands of burial sites or cemeteries or construction areas will prove the glory of the Cushite knowledge and wisdom. These finds have been verified by carbon dating and the use of radioactive compounds. So beginning at the Great Lakes, for over 100,000 years, the Khoikhoi existed and still exists there today in southern Alkebulan and the Kalahari's Okavango. The Khoikhoi has the purest human gene pool of any racial group on Earth. 750,000 years ago, the prehistoric Khoikhoi ancestor had moved up to the east and west and North Alkebulan because of adverse weather conditions. It is believed that the Ice Age caused the growth and expansion of the Kalahari Desert as well as the Sahara, resulting in forced migration. Some Khoikhoi eventually exited Africa, probably by boats or canoes across the Red Sea, crossing the Sinai Desert and the land known today as Saudi Arabia. Some Khoikhoi ancestors also exited Alkebulan and entered into the tropical areas of Europe and Asia approximately 700,000 years ago. Finally, Khoikhoi Bushmen fanned out in East and West Alkebulan, finally settling down among the tropical regions of the Alkebulan Great Lakes between 200,000 and 20,000 years ago. This entire region was originally part of the Kushite Empire, probably the most powerful and far-reaching empire that also spread into other continents. Now, let's talk about the precursor to Taseti. Taseti, Kerma, Kush. We could say these are more modern versions of the early Kushites. The rise of the Kushites was indelible, systematic, very deliberate, based on all the prehistoric histories that I have provided so far. Habilis, about 2 million years ago. Erectus, about 1 million plus years ago. Homo sapiens, at least the early Homo sapiens, under 1 million years ago. And then I spoke of the Khoikhoi in southern Alkebulan, the Khoikhoi, the Khoisan, the Bantu. From the Terran cultures to the Nazlet cultures and villages, and all the industrial and commercial practices of these very early villages and how they form in one place, in one locale, these exceptional villages that became the kingdom of Kustal, the kingdom of Naphtali, the kingdoms from Tanzania to Egypt, the kingdoms of Kerma, the kingdoms of Taseti, the kingdom of all these different places that became the imperial system of the Kushite Empire. I'll walk you through it step by step. Stay tuned. The rise of the Kushite, the development of the Kushite Empire. Now we will give you details in terms of timeline, and we'll give you details in terms of how the various kingdoms in the Kushite Empire created their own systems of administration, who had their different inventions that coalesced into all the inventions that led to the creation and development of the powerful Kushite Empire, stretching from Tanzania to Egypt. We will give you all that details, and then we will also, in doing so, focus on the more critical kingdoms and cultures that gave rise to the powerful Kushite Empire. So we are leaving habilis and erectus and the early Homo sapiens behind, and now we're going to take it from the Khoikhoi and their migration to east-west and north Alkebulan. We will briefly touch on how they crossed the ocean into Europe and other places in the world about 750,000 years ago. We will also look at the more recent 150,000 years ago, the Atarian culture and the Nazareth culture and their contributions in terms of the first industrialized systems, the first commercial systems, and we will give you details about what they invented, what they created, what they traded in, and how they did it, how they created the first industrialized and commercial systems, including the Khoikhoi. And then we're going to turn to the Ishanga bone was discovered 30,000 years ago. They invented mathematical calculations. And then we're going to stay a little longer in Angola, where hundreds, perhaps thousands of axes were found in rows, indicating a very industrialized and technological culture. And that was over 70,000 years ago. And then we're going to move up to the Naptans, or the Naptan Kingdom. You've heard of Napta Playa, where the first astronomical system was found anywhere in the world. A system with a calendar that they use, the Naptans use to study the stars and for their study of astrology. Of course, they engage also in the scientific studies of geology and earth science. And of course, they invented trigonometry, algebra, and other mathematical calculations that they used to map the Orion system, the star systems, accurately. And this was between 15,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago, between 15,000 years to 30,000 years ago. We'll also tell you about the Naptan society, how they dug wells, and they set up administrative system, how sophisticated and how civilized they were about 30,000 years ago. Of course, the Naptans were worshiping the supreme God that they believe live in the heavens that they studied. We'll tell you about the Naptan culture and, more specifically, the Napta Playa. And then we're going to move up to Kustal, another kingdom, critical kingdom. Kustal in the Kushite Empire was the birthplace of kingship, of dynastic rule, of priesthood. And then, to take it a step further, divine kingship, divine worship, divine priesthood, the divine supreme deity, or the divine supreme God. The Kustal discovery we will discuss in great details as well. All of these findings were made in the Cushite Empire. And then finally we will discuss the kingdom and the empire of Taseti that gave rise to Kermer. And then we will discuss Kustal, Taseti, Kerma, Napata, Meroe, Egypt, all part of the glorious indelible Cushite empire.